Let's see, first question. There are people that I've talked to or heard that they'll say science has always been closing the gap between what we know and what we don't know. And before science became so relevant to our lives and so advanced, people used God to fill those gaps. For instance, very early on when thunder would happen, because they didn't know really what thunder was, they would attribute it to the gods. So people read the Bible the same way. They'll say demon possession. They didn't know what schizophrenia was, or they didn't know what epilepsy was, so they attributed it to demon possessions. And eventually, our knowledge of science will grow to such an extent, it'll close all the gaps, and there is no need for God. How do you respond to that?
I don't know.
Okay, thanks to everybody for coming. That's great.
I asked Joe if I could also make an opening statement so that you know how these questions are going to be answered. And then I will take the gaps of metaphysics and all other disciplines over against a scientific single vision, which is what that proposition is talking about. There's a funny story I often tell of these two guys who are talking to each other, and one fellow says to him, I'm a little bit thirsty, and so I'd like to make a bet with you. I'd like to ask myself a question, and if I answer it, why don't you buy me a Coke? So the guy says, what did you say? You'll ask yourself a question, and if you answer it, I'll buy you a Coke? He said, that's not a bet. He said, no. Then you ask yourself a question, and if you answer it, I'll buy you one. And we'll keep going this way till one of us asks ourselves a question we can't answer. The fellow said, this is the strangest bet I've ever heard of. He said, but since you proposed it, go ahead and begin. So the fellow said, my question to me is this: how does a rabbit burrow a hole deep into the ground without throwing mud onto the outside? He said, that's my question to me. How can a rabbit burrow a hole deep into the ground without throwing mud onto the outside? And he said, my answer is, let's start burrowing from the inside. The other guy says, how does it do that? He says, I don't know, that's your question. I was walking through the Newark airport some years ago. It was about 6:30. I'd taken a long 14-hour flight. I think it was from Bangkok or somewhere. And as I was walking, went to the gate, I looked at the marquee, and it showed a different flight to mine. I was looking for my flight to Atlanta from Newark. And so I tapped the lady on the shoulder and said to her, is this going where it says it's going, or is it supposed to be going to Atlanta? She said, oh no, it's going to Atlanta. That's just a previous flight. I said, well, good to know that. So I turned around to walk away, and I heard the patter of feet behind me. And then she tapped me on the shoulder. She said, excuse me, are you Ravi Zacharias? I said, I'm afraid so. Yes, I am. She said, that is absolutely amazing. I never thought you would have questions either. The fact of the matter is, we all have questions. I believe there's a difference between a question and a doubt. A question is probing, trying to unpack, trying to get deeper and deeper into a subject. A doubt sort of becomes a stumbling block in your journey to an answer. I look at a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grid, and I'll give you this and then start the answer to the first question, because I think this is very critical. 1, truth is the ultimate goal in all of our questions and our pursuits. Truth is the most valuable thing in the world. It was Winston Churchill who said in warfare, truth is the most valuable thing in the world. It's so valuable that oftentimes it's protected by a bodyguard of lies. We have to get to the truth. Number 2, how do we test the truth? There are 2 broad theories. One is called the correspondence theory. The other is the coherence theory. When you go into a court of law and a witness is being asked to give answers, the attorney is looking for 2 components here. Are the answers corresponding to reality? And when all of the answers are put together, is there a coherence to these answers? So it is generally acknowledged that there's correspondence and coherence. And then 3, you test the truth by logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance. Is it logically consistent? Is there an empirical way to verify this, or is just an assertion that is not even falsifiable? And ultimately, is there any experiential relevance to this? 1, truth. 2, correspondence, coherence, 3, logical consistency, empirical adequacy, experiential relevance. 4, there are 4 questions you deal with: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Now, it's very important what I've just said to you. A worldview deals with these 4 subjects. Where did I come from? What gives life meaning? How do I differentiate between good and evil? And what happens to a human being when he or she dies? Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Now, to get to these, this is the biggest challenge. There really are 5 disciplines you have to pull together, especially in a worldview that's claiming all of the answers are there for these questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. God, knowledge, reality, man, morality. God deals with theology. Knowledge deals with epistemology. How do I get to this? Reality deals with metaphysics. Morality deals with ethics, and man deals with anthropology. So you've got theology, you've got metaphysics, you've got epistemology, you've got morality, and you've got anthropology. All of this brought into that. So as I attempt to answer your questions, remember, this is what I'm actually trying to accomplish: present to you the coherence of the Christian worldview, how it is coherent and consistent with all of the claims that it makes. If you counter that, you have to put your worldview to the same test. Can you really put the answers together with the 5 various disciplines, the 4 questions, the 3 tests, the 2 categories, and the ultimate pursuit of truth? I just wanted you to have that in your background. Now I can go home and you can start asking yourself the questions here. The issue of the gaps. Science will one day conquer everything, every agnostic terrain that we walk through. It's not only a pipe dream, it is false. Even the great Stephen Hawking attempted to do that in his latest book when he was talking about how he was going to pursue for a theory of everything and so on. And on page 5 of the book, he makes this comment. He said, philosophy is dead. When he said the philosophy is dead, we, the theologians, didn't have to respond to him. The philosophers responded to him. And the chairman of the philosophy department at Cambridge, where I did some of my philosophical work, he made this comment to Stephen Hawking and to the rest. He said, maybe it's about time that the oracular Professor Hawking recognized that we have kept up with his discipline much more than he has with ours. And that's it was the book, The Grand Design, which Hawking had written, that philosophy is dead, science was going to come up with a theory of everything. Maybe the oracular Professor Hawking needs to realize we have kept up much more with his discipline than he has kept up with ours. Today at lunch, we're having an interesting conversation with a total skeptic. And my friend Sanj and another friend Jared, who's here, were in the audience, and they were in the discussion at lunch. And this other gentleman, looked at a kind of a scientific single vision for life too, is going to explain it all, although he had studied philosophy. And he went on to say, he said, no, I love these 2 guys. I love Sanj and I love Jared. I said, wait a minute. What scientific theory defines love for you? You have just made a philosophical assertion, not a scientific assertion. Is there any objective point of reference for the definition of love? These are metaphysical propositions. And Michael Polanyi, the great philosopher of science, in his life work called Personal Knowledge, which was a required text in the philosophy of science for years and years and years. You go into any philosophy of science professor's room and you will see Michael Polanyi's book there sitting front and center. And he warned scientists not to make the cardinal blunder of thinking that science is going to explain everything. For example, if you're a scientist and you're in the laboratory and you're doing your experimentation, looking for a scientific single vision of life, here's my question for you. What scientific imperative tells you that you must be honest in your findings? That's not a scientific argument. That is a philosophical argument, an argument of why you should be truthful. Do we expect our scientists to tell the truth? Do we expect the findings to be revealed as truth? Science may get us to many, many hills that we can climb and arrive at, but the ultimate question of life is going to be one of meaning and purpose and loving relationships. That will not come to you from a scientific single vision of life. That's why the founder of the Goddard Institute of Space, Robert Jastrow, is known so well for that famous statement in his book, God and the Astronomers, where he said, for the scientist who's been living by this dream of his, that he's going to arrive at all of the answers, going to arrive at all of these answers by science alone, that dream is going to end as they climb higher and higher and higher up the mountain, and they scale up right to the top to think they've found the final answer, and they might well be greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. That was Jastrow's comment. Now, I want to read for you one more statement on this, and then we'll move on. And that is this statement by the famed physicist David Berlinski, who responded to Richard Dawkins's book, The God Delusion. Berlinski, who's an agnostic, he's of a Jewish background, but he's an agnostic, if not a skeptic, wrote a book in response to Dawkins's book, The God Delusion. His was called The Devil's Delusion. And in the flap of that book, here's what Berlinski, a skeptic, says. Has anyone provided a proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Have the sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so long as it is not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for the good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy of thought and opinion within the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or in their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on. Now that's Berlinski. He's not trying to make a case for any religion. He says, I'm not there. I'm an agnostic. I'm a skeptic. He said, but when the sciences move into this terrain with the autocracy and the arrogance of a single scientific vision for all of reality, they are moving beyond the purview of science and are becoming very unscientific at that point. So I say to you, science has been of a great help in getting us to so many arenas and helping us with medicine and knowledge and all of that. But science will never be able to answer the questions of love, meaning, and purpose. And if the scientific premises turn out to be true, that we are the random collocation of atoms, of time plus matter plus chance, you will be left with no moral perspective on which to condemn anybody who chooses to behead someone in public and gloat over it, because those are moral issues we are dealing with, and science doesn't deal with morality. And if it talks about the evolution of morality, then it is deterministic, and if it is deterministic, it is not making a true assertion. And therefore, if it says that morality is not true, the assertion itself either claims to be true or is not true. And if it claims to be true, then it goes beyond science. So I just tell you, they've got a big gap between science and ultimate metaphysics, and that gap can only be filled by true religious thought that is coherent and corresponding to reality. That's it.